Step 4. To tell browsers how to encode characters on your page, set the char set to UTF-8. UTF-8 is a universal character set that includes almost every character from all human languages. Inside the head element, nest a meta element with the attribute set to UTF-8. Remember that meta elements are self-closing and do not need a closing tag. Meta. So meta. Car set equal to UTF. Step 5. You can have multiple self-closing meta elements on a web page. What distinguishes one meta element from the other is the attribute. You should add a new meta element for each attribute you want to specify. Add another self-closing meta element within the head. Give it a name attribute set to viewport and a content attribute set to with equal device. Yeah, so your page looks the same on all devices.
Step 6. Now you're ready to start adding content to the page. Within the body, nest an H1 element with the text CSS color markers.
What? Can't pick the code.
Step 7. In this project, you'll work with an external CSS file to style the page. We've already created a style.css file for you. But before you can use it, you'll need to link it to the page. Nest a link element within the head element. Give it a real attribute set to style sheet and an href attribute set to styles.css. Okay. Step 8. Now that your external CSS file is set up, you can start styling the page. As a reminder, here's how to target a paragraph element and align it to the right. This example, paragraph, text line right. Create a new CSS rule that targets the H1 element and set its text align property to center. Step 9. Now you've added some elements that you'll eventually style into color markers. First, within the body element, add a div element and set its class attribute to container. Make sure the div element is below the H1 element.
Container of markers.
I was making sure. Div class equals container. Step 10. Next, within the div element, add another div element and give it a class marker. Okay.
On to the next 5. Step 11. It's time to add some color to the marker. Remember that one way to add color to an element is to use a color keyword like black, cyan, or yellow. As a reminder, here's how to target the class FreeCodeCamp. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class marker and set its background color, background property to red. Note you will not see any changes after adding the CSS. Marker. Background color.
Okay.
Step 12. The background color was applied, but since the marker div element has no content in it, it doesn't have any height by default. And your marker CSS rule set the height property to 25 pixels and the width to 200 pixels. There we go. With 200. All right. Step 13. Your marker will look better if it was centered on a page. An easy way to do that is with the margin shorthand property. In the last project, you set the margin area of elements separately with properties like margin top and margin left. The margin shorthand property makes it easy to set multiple margin areas at the same time. To center your element on a page, set its margin property to auto. This sets top, right, bottom, and left all to auto. Step 14. Now that you've got one marker centered with color, it's time to add the other markers. In the container div, add 2 more div elements and give them each a class of marker. 2 more markers.
What does it do? Okay.
Step 15. While you have 3 separate marker div elements, they look like one big rectangle. You should add some space between them to make it easier to see each element. When the shorthand margin property has 2 values, it sets margin top and margin bottom to the first value, margin left and right to the second value. In your marker CSS rule, set the margin property to 10 pixels auto. There we go. Looks like a flag.
That's all right.
No, you already have the margin bottom.
Oh, no, I was like, yeah, that doesn't look right.
2 margins.
All right.
Margin boo. All right.
16. To give the markers different colors, you'll need to add a unique class to each one. Multiple classes can be added to an element by listing them in the class attribute and separating them with a space. For example, the following adds both the animal and dog classes to a div element. This example right here. If you add multiple classes to an HTML element, the styles of the first classes you list may be overwritten by later classes. To begin, add the class 1 to the first marker div element.
Oh, that Safari keep on freezing on me.
Hmm?
Not Safari keep freezing.
Hmm.
Crap browser.
Oh, okay, hold up. Should add the class 1 to the first marker div element.
Or do you have a class?
Oh. So just, oh, okay. So just add one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Shouldn't it be separated with a comma or something?
Just a space.
Oh, okay.
So you have to get rid of the extra. Yeah, it's just a space.
That looks creepy. Like, I probably get confused.
Yeah, that's why like for multi-words class names, you just separate them with a dash.
Hmm.
It's like if it's, I don't know, like brown dog, be brown dog space, yellow dog space. Oh wait, brown dash dog space. That's a little weird, but
Yeah. Next, remove the background color property and set and its value from the dot marker CSS rule. Hmm. So just remove the background color, right?
I believe so.
Okay, now we got no colors. Okay. Step 18. Then create a new CSS rule that targets the class 1 and sets its background color property to red. Okay. Step 1. Step 19. Add the class 2 to the second marker div and add the class 3 to the third marker div. Step 20. Create a CSS rule that targets the class 2 and sets its background color to property to green. Also, create a separate CSS rule that targets the class 3 and sets its background color to blue. Oh, okay. Okay.
Step 21. There are two main color models. The additive RGB, red, green, blue model used in electronic devices, and the subtractive CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black model used in print. This project, you'll work with the RGB model. This means that colors begin as black and change as different levels of red, green, and blue are introduced. An easy way to see this is with the CSS RGB function. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class container and set its background color to black with RGB 0, 0, 0. 0. Container. Color. Right. Step 22. A function is a piece of code that can take an input and perform a specific action. The CSS RGB function accepts values or arguments for red, green, and blue and produce a color. Each red, green, and blue value is a number from 0 to 255. 0 means that there's 0% of the color and is black. 255 means that there's 100% of that color. In the .1 CSS rule, replace the color keyword red with the RGB function. The RGB function set the value for red to 255, the value for green to 0, and the value of blue to 0. Alright. Step 23. Notice that the background color for your marker is still red. This is because you set the red value of the RGB function to the max of 255, or 100% red, and set both the green and blue values to 0. Now use the RGB function to set the other colors. In 2 CSS rule, use the RGB function to set the background color to the max value for green and 0 for the other values. And in 3 CSS rule, use the RGB function to set the background color to the max for blue and 0 for the other values. RGB RGB. Step 24. While the red and blue markers look the same, the green one is much lighter than it was before. This is because the green color keyword is actually a darker shade. It's about halfway between black and the maximum value for green. In the 2 CSS rule, set the value in the RGB function to 127 to lower its intensity. Interesting. Step 25. Now add a little more vertical space between your markers and the edge of the container element therein. In the container CSS rule, use the shorthand padding property to add 10 pixels of top and bottom padding and set the left and right padding to 0. This works similarly to the shorthand margin property you used earlier. Padding 10 and 0.
Step 26. In an additive RGB color model, primary colors are colors that, when combined, create pure white. But for this to happen, each color needs to be at its highest intensity. Before you combine colors, set your green marker back to pure green. For the RGB function in the 2 CSS rule, set green back to the maximum value of 255. Now that you have the primary RGB colors, it's time to combine them. For the RGB function in the container rule, set the red, green, and blue values to the max of 255. Secondary colors are the colors you'll get when you combine primary colors. You might have noticed some secondary colors in the last step as you change the red, green, and blue values. To create the first secondary color, yellow update the RGB function in the 1 CSS rule to combine pure red and pure green. Okay. Oh, I got you. Pure red and pure green. So this just to make yellow. So okay. Step 29. To create the next secondary color, Cena, update the RGB function in the 2 CSS rule to combine pure green, pure blue. Pure green, pure blue. Step 30. To create the final secondary color, magenta, update the RGB function in the 3 CSS rule to combine pure blue and pure red. Now that you're familiar with secondary colors, you'll learn how to create trinary colors. Trinary colors are created by combining a primary with a nearby secondary color. To create the trinary color orange, update the RGB function in the 1 CSS rule so that red is the max value to set green to 127. green. Green. This is going to be green to be 127. And
Oh,
red. Oh, 110.
I was changing that one. Step 32. Notice that to create orange, you have to increase the intensity of red and decrease the intensity of the green RGB values. This is because orange is the combination of red and yellow and falls between the two colors on the color wheel. To create the terry color spring green, combine cyan with green. Update the RGB function in the 2 CSS rule so that green is in max value and set blue to 127. Green is at max value. Blue is 127. Step 33. And to create the terry color violet, combine magenta with blue. Update the RGB function in the 3 CSS rule so that blue is at the max value and set red to 127.
So we're just changing the red to 127. Looks like we're going to create all the colors on this one.
Step 34. There are 3 more terry colors: Charis, green, azul,
Azure,
and
I think that's how you pronounce it.
all right, azure and rose. To create char tiras green, update the RGB function in the 1 CSS rule so that red is at 127 and set green to its max value. For azure, update the RGB function in the 2 CSS rule so that green is at 127 and blue is at the max value. And for rose, which is sometimes called bright pink, update the RGB function in the 3 CSS rule so that the blue is at 127 and red is at the max value. Yeah, we're going through the colors. Green is at max. 2. Green is at 127. Step 35. Now that you've gone through all the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors on a color wheel, it'll be easier to understand other color theory concepts and how they impact design. First, in the CSS rule 1, 2, and 3, just the values in the RGB functions so that the background color of each element is set to pure black. Remember that RGB functions use the additive color model where colors start as black and change as the values of red, green, and blue increases.
So we're setting all these to black, right?
Yep.
So all these are.
Yeah. There.
Okay. A color wheel is a circle where similar colors or hues are near each other and different ones are further apart. For example, pure red is between the hues rose and orange. Two colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel are called complementary colors. If two complementary colors are combined, they produce gray. But when they are placed side by side, these colors produce strong visual contrast and appear brighter. In the RGB function for the 1 CSS rule, set the red value to the max of 255 to produce pure red. In the RGB function for 2 CSS rule, set the values for green and blue to the max of 255 to produce science.
So, cyan.
Okay, what are we doing? Alright, produce the red. 255. Pure red. 2